On the eastern face of a quarry at Tura across the Nile from Giza, there is a worked panel of stone that was sealed behind a rockfall sometime in antiquity and not cleared again until a survey crew opened it in 1889. Carved into the wall is a band of hieroglyphs that does not describe a god or a king or a victory. It describes a process, a method for making the surface of stone perfectly smooth, the inscription says, smoother than water at rest. The panel was recorded by the British engineer and surveyor Wayneman Dixon, the same man who, years earlier, had found the strange iron and the cedar relics inside the Great Pyramid. He noted the Tura panel, copied a portion of it, and filed it, and then he moved on without a word of explanation. For more than a century, mainstream Egyptology has taught one answer. The outer casing stones of the pyramids were smoothed by hand. Masons ground the limestone with copper tools, sand, and water, polishing each block over weeks until it shone. That answer is in every textbook, but it cannot account for what the casing stones actually are. The few that survive are flat to within a fraction of a millimeter across their entire face. They were fitted together so closely that the joints, and there are acres of them, are too fine to slide a knife blade into. Mortar was used, but the stones touch. They touch across surfaces the size of a door, with a flatness modern masons achieve only with diamond grinding wheels and laser levels. Copper, sand, and patience do not produce that, not at that scale, not across 22 acres of outer surface. The hieroglyphs at Tura say something different. They say the builders did not grind the stone down. They say the builders changed the surface of the stone itself. Here is the fact that the official story has never resolved. When the Great Pyramid was new, it was not the rough, stepped mountain you see today. It was sheathed in roughly 144,000 casing stones of white Tura limestone, each one cut, dressed, and polished until the entire structure was a single mirror-smooth slope. Arab historians who saw the casing still intact in the medieval period wrote that the surface was so bright it hurt the eyes, and that it seemed to glow at dawn. Travelers said you could see your reflection in it. Most of that casing is gone now, stripped away over centuries to build the city of Cairo. But a handful of stones survive at the base of the Great Pyramid and on the Pyramid of Khafra, and those surviving stones are the problem. Their faces are flat to a tolerance of 1/100th of an inch, their joints close to a hairline. Geologists who have examined them describe a surface finish that, by every conventional measure, requires machine grinding. Remember that number, 1/100th of an inch, held flat, across a face the size of a tabletop, repeated 144,000 times, on stones weighing several tons each, fitted seamlessly up a slope nearly 500 feet high. That is the wound this video is going to open, because hand polishing cannot produce it, and the inscription at Tura claims to know what did. In the next several minutes, you are going to see exactly what the Tura inscription describes, not as a religious text, but as a technical record. You'll see the three-stage process it lays out for finishing the stone. You'll see why a chemist looking at the same panel reaches a conclusion no Egyptologist will print. And you'll see why, even with everything we know today, this surface finish cannot be reproduced, not because we lack the skill, but because the conditions that made it possible no longer exist. If hidden history is something you can't look away from, subscribe. Every week we read the inscriptions the museums won't translate in public. Because here's where it turns strange. The Tura panel is not the only one. The most complete version of the process is carved somewhere no tourist will ever stand. The fuller inscription sits inside a worked gallery in the Tura quarry system, in a section that has been closed to general access since the quarries were fenced for safety in the 20th century. The inscription runs along a dressed limestone wall, and when you stop treating it as decoration, it reads like a set of instructions. The top register shows the raw block. The Egyptians drew it the way they always drew unfinished stone, rough-edged with short chisel marks that indicated it had been cut from the quarry. Nothing unusual, this is the starting condition. But look closer at how the block is positioned. It is shown lying flat, face up, raised off the ground on two small supports. That is not how you draw a stone you are about to grind. You grind a stone in place, braced against something solid. You lay a stone flat and face up, lifted clear of the dirt, when you are about to pour something onto it and let it settle without disturbance. The Egyptians chose that orientation deliberately. Before the process has even begun, the drawing is already telling you the surface is going to be treated, not abraded. There is one more detail in the top register that the standard reading passes over. Beside the raw block sits a vessel, a wide, shallow basin of the kind the Egyptians drew for holding liquids, not the deep jars they used for grain or oil. It is shown already full. Whatever the process is, the material it requires is prepared in advance and waiting before the block is even set in position. This is staged work, sequenced. The inscription is describing a workshop procedure, not a single act of labor. The middle register is where it stops making ordinary sense. It shows the same block, but now a substance is being applied to its face, drawn as a series of flowing lines pouring downward, the convention Egyptian draftsmen used for liquids in motion. Above the liquid is a determinative, a small marker that tells you what kind of word you are reading. The marker here is not the one for water and not the one for oil. It is the rarer sign used for a substance that transforms what it touches. The same sign appears in metalworking texts, beside the word for the flux that lets two metals fuse. So the second stage is not polishing. It is the application of something that changes the stone's surface chemically, but the inscription doesn't stop there. Look at what surrounds the block in the middle register. On either side of it stand figures, and they are not holding the tools you would expect. There are no grinding stones in their hands, no copper rubbers, no abrasive blocks. Instead, two of the figures hold the wide, shallow basins from the top register, tilted in the act of pouring. A third holds a flat implement drawn edge on, the kind used not to scrape but to spread, to draw a liquid evenly across a surface before it sets. The whole human element of the scene is wrong for a polishing operation and exactly right for a coating one. Nobody in the register is doing the hard, repetitive, weeks-long grinding the textbooks describe. They are pouring and spreading. The labor the official story depends on is simply not in the picture, and there is a number hidden in the arrangement. The figures are shown in a repeating group, and the group repeats a specific number of times along the register, a count the Egyptians used elsewhere to mean, do this again until complete. The drawing is not showing you a single coat applied once. It is showing you a cycle performed in sequence, building the surface up in passes. That repetition is the first hint of the operational note that comes next, the part of the inscription that the published copies leave out entirely. The lower register shows the finished block, and beside it a single line of text describing the result. The phrase uses a word that appears in only a handful of Egyptian inscriptions, sehej mu, which reads literally, made bright as water, not polished, not smoothed by hand, made bright as water. The stone, the text says, was brought to a finish like the surface of a still pool. That word choice matters more than it looks. The Egyptians had a perfectly ordinary common word for polished, and they used it constantly for jewelry, for mirrors of burnished copper, for the smoothed wood of fine furniture. It appears thousands of times across the record. If the casing stones had simply been polished, that is the word the scribe would have reached for. He did not use it. He reached instead for a rare construction that does not describe an action performed on a surface, but a state the surface was brought into, bright as water. You polish a thing by working against it. You bring a thing to the brightness of water by letting it level itself, the way still water does, finding its own perfect plane with no hand guiding it. The grammar itself is pointing away from grinding and toward flowing. Whoever carved this knew the difference and chose his words to record it. And then comes the part the published copies leave out. Between the middle and lower registers, in a smaller hand, is an operational note. It describes the substance being applied not once but in stages, thinned, then applied, then left, then a second coat, and it specifies that the work be done in the dry season when the air takes no water, a finishing process that depends on the humidity of the air. That detail is going to matter more than anything else in this video. Hold on to it. What the three registers describe in sequence is this. Take the rough cut block, apply a liquid that reacts with the limestone surface, allow it to set in dry air. The result is a face that is not ground flat but flowed flat, sealed, hardened, and brought to a mirror finish by chemistry, not by abrasion. This is the point where most people expect the explanation to fall apart. It doesn't, because the chemistry the inscription describes is real and it has a modern name. In 1974, the French materials scientist Joseph Davidovits, working at first on industrial cements, proposed that some of the stone used in Egyptian construction was not purely carved natural rock, but a kind of cast or chemically reformed limestone, a geopolymer, a stone-like material created when limestone is broken down and allowed to reset through an alkaline reaction. His work was published and debated for decades. The core claim is not fringe. Under the right conditions, limestone can be chemically reconstituted, and its surface can be made to reform into a dense, glass-smooth skin. Then consider what limestone actually is. Calcium carbonate. Apply a mild acid and it dissolves at the surface. Apply an alkaline solution under the right conditions and the surface recrystallizes. A skilled chemist can take a rough block of limestone and, through controlled surface reaction, produce a face that is sealed, hardened, and optically smooth, a finish that looks, to the naked eye, exactly like high polish. The reaction does the leveling that a grinding wheel would otherwise have to do because the liquid flows into every low point before it sets. It self-levels, like water finding its own surface. That is what the phrase "made bright as water" describes. Not a metaphor, a mechanism. And in 2006, a team at Drexel University in Philadelphia, led by materials scientist Michel Barsoum, examined samples from the Great Pyramid under an electron microscope. They reported finding, in some surface material, a microstructure more consistent with a reformed, chemically set limestone than with simple natural stone cut from a quarry. The finding was contested, as everything in this field is. But the microscope does not have an opinion. It showed a surface that had at some point been in a fluid or reactive state. The only variable separating a laboratory result from the casing of the Great Pyramid is scale and recipe. The lab can do it on a sample. The inscription describes doing it on 144,000 stones. So why is this not the standard explanation? Why does every official sign at Giza still say the stones were hand-polished with copper and sand? The erasure starts early. The casing stones themselves were stripped, not by erosion, but on purpose. After a massive earthquake in 1303 shook many of them loose, the rulers of Cairo carted the casing away by the thousands to build mosques and walls. The single best body of evidence, acres of finished surface, was physically dismantled and is now scattered, unmarked, inside the masonry of a medieval city. You cannot study what isn't there. The Tura inscriptions fared no better. When Napoleon's scholars surveyed Egypt and produced the Description de l'Egypte, the multi-volume work published from 1809 onward, the quarry sections at Tura were recorded in the early plates. In the later printings, a portion of the quarry survey was reduced, with fewer plates and less detail. The technical drawings of the worked galleries, the ones that showed inscriptions rather than scenery, did not survive the editing. The pattern continues into the museum era. The Davidovits geopolymer work, when it appeared, was not so much disproven as starved, denied access, denied samples, kept at arm's length from the very stones that would settle the question. When Barsoom's team published, the response from parts of the Egyptological establishment was not, "Let us test this further." It was to question why a material scientist was looking at pyramids at all. The drawbridge went up, and the access to the source itself is controlled to this day. Permits to sample casing material directly to chemically test a surviving Tura casing stone and settle whether it is cut or cast are almost never granted. The stated reason is preservation. But a non-destructive surface scan damages nothing. The tests that would end the debate are the tests that do not get approved. Now let me be careful here, because this matters. I am not telling you the ancient Egyptians had a chemistry lab. They had no periodic table, no beakers, no word for alkaline reaction. What they had was something arguably more impressive, a process learned by observation and passed down by hand that produced a result we can only describe using the language of modern materials science. The inscription is not a chemistry paper. It is a technical record written by people who understood empirically that a certain liquid applied to a certain stone in a certain dry season would make that stone bright as water. And that brings us to the part of the title I have not yet answered. Why can't it be repeated? Here is the detail I told you to hold on to. The process depends on dry air, on a season when the air takes no water. The chemical setting of a reformed limestone surface is exquisitely sensitive to humidity. Too much moisture in the air and the reaction goes wrong. The surface clouds, cracks, and fails to seal. The Giza plateau of the 3rd millennium BCE was drier than it is now. The climate that the builders depended on, the long, stable, bone-dry seasons that let the surface set perfectly, is not the climate of modern Egypt. The Nile Valley has changed. The air has changed. The exact conditions the inscription specifies no longer reliably occur where the pyramids stand. So it is not only that we lost the recipe, it is that we may have lost the weather it required. You could know the formula precisely and still not reproduce the result because one of the ingredients was the ancient air itself. The inscription is still there on the wall of the Tura gallery behind the fence. The line that reads, "Made bright as water," is still carved into the limestone. The surviving casing stones are still at the base of the Great Pyramid, flat to 1/100th of an inch, joints too fine for a blade, waiting for someone with the right permit and the right question to finally test what they are actually made of. The pyramid still stands, and every dawn, the few stones that are left catch the first light exactly the way the historian said the whole thing once did, bright as water, and no one alive can make stone do that again.